Alright guys, welcome back to Tomboy Official. Here we talk about topics that are related to, I don't even know why I use the word tomboy, but it's something that just kind of, I think people can understand the word and they know where we're going with it. So I'm sticking with that term because it's a commonly used term, even though it's less commonly used now than it was before. So previously I talked about gender dysphoria, the term gender dysphoria, the term dysphoria in general, kind of how it started being used more near 2019 was like a peak when people started using term dysphoria, and when it's related to gender. We talked about trans terms, how common gender dysphoria is, terminology related to gender, transsexualism, transvestism, non-binary, and definitions of gender. And so I wanted to talk more about how people who do have any dysphoria can kind of notice that, and how people can also deal with it, and how they can, get some help for it. So, when we previously talked about how gender dysphoria, how common it is, when they said that it was 1 in 4,000 people getting medical interventions, that leads us to believe that it's going to be more than 1 in 4,000 people that have the experience of gender dysphoria, because not all of the people who have the experience are going to get medical intervention for it, or seek help, or seek interventions, or have access to these things either, or know how to get help. And that's, the help that is available to people oftentimes can be just very difficult to get through and to access, and to, it's something that's not too common. And I think the reason why it's not too common, in all honesty, is because it hasn't been a common part of our culture, at least in American Western culture. It hasn't been a part of our culture to really even, they're saying there's been an increase since 1950 of people barely starting to use terms like dysphoria, and then in 2019 it's doubled since since 1975-ish or so, or 1980s or 90s or so. It's doubled since about that amount of time of people using the term dysphoria. And when I typed it in, I think gender dysphoria was something that came up. So there are other areas where people can be dysphoric, but not everyone who has a specific gender identity that's not a binary identity is gonna experience gender dysphoria, and not everybody's diagnosed with it. It says that it's not a mental illness. It says it's a, what do they word it as? It's a diagnosis, a health diagnosis, a medical diagnosis, but not a mental illness. So that's something that over time, that understanding has changed, because if you look at the DSMs, the Diagnostical and Statistical Manual for diagnosing psychiatric diagnoses, if you look at the DSMs, the current one that we're on is 5. The previous one was DSM-4-TR. And then they go back to the 1, the 2, the 3, the 1, things like that. And so if you look at the older DSMs, a lot of times when you looked at gender related or sexual orientation related topics, if they weren't binary binary gender identities, and if a person wasn't like heterosexual or straight, they were considered to have some sort of mental illness, and it was a diagnosed illness. It wasn't considered a distressing condition that somebody could cope with and get through. It was considered, we need to make you straight, we need to make you not gay, we need to make you, consider yourself as a binary gender, and make you understand that this is how you are, because it's a problem for you that you're not being that way. And that was a very biased and prejudiced viewpoint, just assuming that, hey, this person has a mental illness because they have these stressors in these certain areas. It's not a mental illness, but it can be, there could be signs that show up. And so some of the signs that they mention, they have physical signs that people mention, and then they differentiate between children and teenagers. So it says, for physical signs, it says there are no physical signs, but people with gender dysphoria may experience and display a range of feelings and behaviors, right? So you've got this emotional feelings side of things, and then this action behavioral side of things. It says, in many cases, a person with gender dysphoria begins to feel a mismatch between their biological sex and gender identity during early childhood. For others, this may not happen until puberty, adolescence, or adulthood. So, I would say a lot of times when people start experiencing that mismatch between a biologically your sex organs that you were born with and how you're expected to present with your gender, and how you're expected to identify label your gender based on biologically which sex organs you were born with or which ones you weren't born with. And some people are born with a combination of male and female biological sex organs, and so it's some people are born with both, a combination of both, or maybe they don't have certain organs, and so their gender is already kind of not necessarily on the binary if you look at their sex organs, but a person can identify one way or the other way, or multiple different types of ways. A person can identify in a different way, but I don't really know how that works. Again, like in the hospital setting, I don't know who it is that's choosing, this is a baby boy, this is a baby girl, even, depending if a person was born with like multiple, sex organs and things like that, like multiple combinations of male or female sex organs. But yeah, there's that mismatch that people experience. And so when it talks about children, it says children, it says the behaviors that people would see in children would be insisting that they're the opposite sex. So that would be like someone who was born with, male genitalia, insisting that they're not male and insisting that they are a female. Disliking or refusing to wear clothes that are typically worn by their sex, right? So people who consider themselves tomboys might fit in this category. Wanting to wear clothes typically worn by the opposite sex. Again, disliking or refusing to take part in activities and games that are typically associated with their sex. So that's another thing that you'll see. Wanting to take part in activities and games typically associated with the opposite sex. Preferring to play with children of the opposite biological sex. I don't know. I mean, yeah, that kind of makes sense. Because if those kids of the opposite sex are the opposite biological sex are doing things that child would find desirable activities to do, even if their gender doesn't do them. Like something, for example, would be like playing dress up and wearing necklaces and dresses and heels and things like that. I used to have a I don't know what I would call this person, a church member that I grew up with. It's kind of interesting because the church I grew up in was very, 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 very strict, very, very traditional and conservative. And there was a child that was younger than me, but still, in the same, we interacted often. And he was a boy, and he would often wear like dresses and jewelry and things like this. But there was nothing else about him that seemed, he was artistic, musical, but otherwise he just went to church, hung out. He was in good shape. He wasn't like athletic, but he wasn't like super into sports, but he wasn't like against sports. Like he would play on occasion. And yeah, it's kind of interesting because people would automatically say that he was gay. He is, but just because when he was like, he was in preschool at this time, or like kindergarten or so, and he was wearing like dresses and stuff. And the reason why I remember that is because the church I went to, had their church at a school, and the school had, different classrooms. And so the school and the church, was a religious school that was connected to the church. And so the school, the people who went to the church, some of them were people who owned the school. And so they would give the keys out to the people who were leading. They were called Sabbath school classes. And so the people who were leading like the classes for the kids, and they would divide up into different age ranges. So you don't have like teenagers playing with like preschoolers, but they'd have like different rooms. So like there's like a preschool room, a kindergarten room, different age ranges. And depending on the kids' ages, they would use the rooms for the church classes too, but they would use them like based on the age range of the kids. And so the preschool room was used for the younger children. They would play in there during like the talking part of the service where there's like a sermon and things. And so they would go in there and play. And then some of the older kids, like my age range, we were allowed to go and help the main person who was in charge to just kind of like volunteer and watch the kids and play with them and kind of interact, so that it gave us something to do and we would be involved. But then, if we didn't want them necessarily sit in the church service, or if it was a church service where they're like, it's not appropriate for certain age groups, they'd send us all in to go help with the other kids or whatever. And so we would go help with the kids. And so that's how I knew that this boy was often wearing dresses and things, was because we would, interact often, and he would do that. And I remember some reactions, like mostly, other kids would be like, oh, he's probably gay or whatever. And I bring that up because this was the same school, later on in my life. So I was older, probably in college by this point. I think I was 6th grade with the first kid that I was thinking, like, when he was like, wearing dresses in the preschool room and things like that. Fast forward to like college age, there was a boy, when I would work at the school, there was a boy, the same school, same church school, but they no longer had church there, but it was still a religious school. And the same boy, a different boy, at a little bit older of an age, I think he was probably like 1st or 2nd grade when this thing happened. So I can't remember what the reason was, but I remember I would open the school, I would unlock, the doors, and I would have a shift that would be like before school would start. So for the parents that had to drop off their kids before school, I would be available to watch the kids until school started at what, like 8:30 a.m. or something like that. So I'd get there at like 7 or something. I don't know what time I started, but probably 7 a.m. And I'd have the key and log out, check all the kids in. And there was this one boy who I remember he wore this and I don't remember the event or what, but I remember this was before school. So we're in the gym, and, that's where I would just give them like sports equipment to play. And there were tables for the kids who just wanted to sit and read or talk or whatever. And so I don't remember how, but he had some form of female clothing on. He didn't come to school in it. I want to say he was wearing like a wig, a long haired wig, a hat, maybe like a dress or something like that. And he'd been wearing, like, he didn't come to school in this, but he put it on. And it was like, I don't know if there were like costumes, maybe it was like Halloween. I don't know what was going on, but there were maybe like costumes or something like that and out for the kids. I don't know. Or maybe he got it from the Lost and Found. I don't really know. But either way, he looked like a woman. But he was like this little boy. He was probably like in 1st or 2nd grade. And I remember he had those clothes on, and I was the person in charge at that time, and I just thought it was funny. I was just like, oh, he's kind of just like, because he came up to me, he was like, oh, Grace, look what I'm wearing, and like, I was like, oh, that's nice, and like, I could tell he had a smile on his face, he was kind of playing around, too, and so I just kind of let it go. I left it alone. I was like, okay, like, I wasn't going to tell him don't do it. It didn't really even cross my mind that there was any kind of issue, or that anyone would think any kind of issue about this. He's a boy, he's young, he's wearing a dress, and clearly he was just playing around with it too. And even if he meant it, in my opinion, it wasn't really like an issue. And I was probably like, I don't know, like 22 or something at this time. I don't know how old I was, but in college. And when school started, when school was about to start, the bell would ring, meaning that they had maybe 7 minutes until school would start. So that's when I would start cleaning up, because I'd just leave and that would be the end of my shift for that time till later. So I would be done with work for that time. And the kid, I remember the teacher, the 2nd grade teacher, opened her door, and the first thing she saw was that boy wearing the dress and the wig and the hat and the heels and all these things. And she was so mad. I don't know why she was so mad. And I remember this specifically because he wasn't in her grade. Like, I knew these teachers well. We went to church together. I grew up with these people. I saw them all the time, like at least 5 to 6 days a week. I'd see all these people for like, since I was like a child. And so I knew these people. I knew this teacher. I knew this kid that he wasn't in the 2nd grade class. I think he was in the 1st grade class, and she saw him and she knew him, and she was like, come here, like, of course she couldn't put hands on him or anything, but she by her appearance, she was like, what he's doing is wrong. And the way she even like looked at me was like, she just kind of like gave me like a glance and then looked at him and brought him in the classroom. And I remember she kind of like shut the door. And then, I could tell he was kind of in trouble, but he was kind of always in trouble too. So it was kind of like, that's what was interesting to me, is because he wasn't in her class and she was approaching him like this. And I think she was probably the first teacher to see him wearing these clothes. And I wasn't teaching him then. I taught a computer class there at one point, but I wasn't teaching him at that very second. I was just there like watching the kids, making sure nobody's getting in trouble. And so I remember that, because I was like, dude, like, she's so pissed. And he didn't seem like he was super upset by her reaction, but she was like sternly talking to him about, you can't wear this kind of thing. And like, I don't remember the exact details, because I was working, so I was busy doing other stuff, but I never really like intervened or did anything. And I was just kind of like, wow, like, that's like messed up. It kind of just stuck with me. And then the third and last experience that happened, there was a third one that kind of happened that just, I'd say, really kind of stuck to. But Sorry, there's somebody like over here. The joys of recording in public. I'm sitting outside a post office and there's somebody kind of like out here. But yeah, so there was another experience that happened too. I think same environment. Yeah, because I was a part of this kind of religious area for quite a long time. And yeah, I just remember that, you know, there were things that would come up that were just kind of like a bit troubling. Now that I think of it, I'm like, wow, like, you know, that's odd, you know, because like I feel like even though it was a while ago, that was like at least like 10-15 years back now, I don't think that would be appropriate now. I feel like the teacher would have had to have more understanding. I think, you know, I don't think that would be okay in that setting anymore. Like, I think then it was accepted, and like the way that she reacted was like she was reacting that way because she knew that it would be more acceptable for her to reprimand him for not wearing what she thought he was supposed to be wearing. But the third experience that happened, I found it really interesting because I was older and so I didn't go in like my own chronological order, but kind of the experiences of the age range of the kids. So we used to have this, oh my gosh, we used to have this day that was called like Slave Day, and then they changed the name because they were like, we can't have slaves. So they called it like Servant Day or Indentured Servant Day or like something like that, where you like bid, and we were like, I want to say I was in like 7th or 8th grade. I think I was in 8th grade and my friend was in 7th grade. And, you know, it was common that, you know, like it would be like a lot of times like girls bidding on boys and wanting, you know, the boys to do things that were, you know, like, oh, clean my locker, and I think they would be their servant for like a day or something. So there was one time when they would do the bid, and a lot of times it was like the girls that had crushes on like certain boys would bid on them. I don't remember if people bidded on girls, but I remember like people would put their names for the bidding, and it was this type of fundraiser. And I think grades 7 through 10 could bid on, you know, a boy or whoever signed up to be a servant. They would go up on the stage and then they would start the bidding. I don't remember if there was like a speech or anything. I don't remember, but I just remember there was like a bidding, and they would bid on these people. They would bid on them for not that day, but for a separate day. There would be a day that was called like Servant Day, and this was during like Spirit Week or something, where it was like we'd have like a lot of different, every day was like a different theme. And so I think Servant Day was a different theme day, and it was for a fundraiser, so they could bid, and then whoever bid the highest would win that individual as their servant for Servant Day. And then they weren't only just like, oh, bring me my lunch, do this, do that. It would always get to another level that was like, you know, teenagers. And so, you know, a lot of times, because it was boys that would put themselves to bid, girls would bid on these boys and they'd have crushes on them and all these things. And something that commonly happened all the time is they would bring like dresses and makeup and heels and different stuff like that, and they'd be like, you have to wear this. And so you have to wear these clothes, you have to look like a girl. And, you know, the boys would willingly play along, and they didn't want to do it. A lot of them were just like, this is just part of it. We do this every year, like whatever. They didn't really care. And they weren't the only boy that was usually dressed like that. Usually there were like quite a few boys that were walking around in like dresses and makeup and whatnot. And because the girls dressed them that way, and they would have like, you know, eyeliner and fake lashes and all this like blush and definitely the lipstick and wigs and all these sorts of things, so they'd make them look really, really feminine. And I just found it interesting that That always came up, and it was never in a way like, oh, do you want to do this? It was like, you're my slave, so I'm gonna make you dress like a girl. And then they would do it, and I don't think any of them protested. Maybe they did, I don't remember. But it was usually like jocks, or like, the sports guys, or like the guys that like the girls had the crushes on and stuff. And then, there were a few of them that would bid on the same boy, and they'd all kind of get together and like decide what individually they would have this boy doing. But I remember that, one of my friends, because I remember he was one of my homies, and I was like, well, all of them were, and I would always play basketball with the guys. So a lot of times during servant day, it kind of sucked, because I'm just like, dude, now I can't like hang out and play basketball and stuff, because everybody's like running around in heels and dresses and skirts and stuff, and we can't like play a game. And so we would just not play. And then I just sit around with them, like, while they were, like, and they were clearly unhappy. Like, I was like, they don't want to be dressed like this. They don't want to wear this stuff. And I kind of felt bad for them, because they were, like, embarrassed about it. And they were like, this sucks. But at least they weren't the only one. But I was kind of like, this is odd. I always felt odd about it. But the thing that got me was, they would make them, like, this only happened once from what I recall. But they would make them wear, like, kind of like, bras under their dresses and things, and then they stuffed the bra with like something to make it look like they had breasts. Like, the boys didn't do this, the girls did this to the boys. And mind you, this is a very strict Christian school, so one of the coach type guys comes out, and he sees this, and he sees my friend, and we're just like hanging out in front of his room. And he comes out, it's like lunch break, and the boys weren't dressed like this before lunch, and then he comes out of his room like after lunch, and he flipped, and he was just like, take that off, like, get out of those clothes, like, take that, like, this is completely inappropriate, you guys are going, like, crossing the line. And I can't remember if it was like the fact that he made it so that, not him, but so that, because those girls made it so that those boys had like breasts and things, and like, I mean, it wasn't like prominent features or anything, but it was like, clearly it was crossing a line where it wasn't appropriate. They weren't having fun with it. It was kind of like more like, oh, let's degrade and emasculate these people and make them feel kind of shitty, and like make them wear these clothes. And there was like a ringleader to it as well, as there all often is. But I just found it like interesting that, I mean, he never specifically said why he was mad, but I'm pretty sure the reason was because of the bra stuffing. And I mean, that wasn't the only thing, but I think that is what really set off this adult teacher coach guy. I think he was really pissed about it because of the bra stuffing, and we're like teenagers and stuff, and people have like, body image concerns and stuff, and so it's kind of like, to have like boys running around with like breasts and things, it's kind of like, what is going on? And plus it's like, people are gonna know like, oh, Mr. So-and-so made this event, and now it's a really strict conservative school. So I thought it was interesting, because I can't really tell now that I think of it, if he was like advocating for, the kids that weren't comfortable with somebody forcing them to wear dresses and makeup and boobs and stuff, or if he was just like, because often this happened, they would have the makeup and all that kind of stuff, and the dresses, but like, yeah, he was just like, that's gone too far. And he spoke up about it, and they got in trouble, like the people who, I don't know how much trouble, but I remember he was a grumpy guy. He would yell at kids all the time, like, not like take them in a room and like privately yell at them, but like if there's like a group of people that were screwing up, he'd be like, you guys stop it, you guys are doing the wrong thing. Like, he would be like yelling at people, and his punishments were always through PE, so he'd always be like, okay, like, whatever you did in the classroom, you're running extra laps, or you're doing extra PE stuff for that. And so it was just interesting. It's interesting that happened, but those are three completely different situations where this whole entire topic completely came up. And not only did it come up, but But, the adults in these 3 different settings in this very Christian Adventist environment were reacting in different ways. Like the preschool room with the boy wearing the dresses and things, like this was like something he did almost every Saturday, and I don't think anybody really cared. Like the kids would kind of comment, but nobody really like bullied him, teased him, other than like people saying, oh, he must be gay. But nobody was like, don't do this. Like I never remember any of the Sabbath school teachers being like, stop wearing dresses, stop wearing heels. And then the other one where the kid was like in 2nd or so grade, he or when the 2nd grade teacher came out to kind of reprimand him for wearing like the dress and the heels and all that kind of stuff, she was mad at him because she felt like he shouldn't be wearing that. And then when the coach, for the older kids, for the teens, was mad, it's like he was mad because he thought that, people were crossing the line by making these boys, wear like bras and stuff them to make it look like they had breasts and things like that. To him was like, so they're these are like the kind of people that I would say that I grew up around, that were kind of like the adults, people that were like these were all like my parents' age. My parents interacted with these people. It was their friends. And then the kids were all kind of like my age, and then there were kids that were younger than me, some kids that were older than me. So yeah, like when it comes to people wearing different clothes and wearing different types of things and playing in a certain different kind of way and different kind of hobbies, that's something you definitely see in kids, and kids wanting to like experiment with it and stuff. But then you do see adults often just like nipping it in the bud, especially if it's like a boy wearing a dress. Now if it was a girl wearing a tie, I don't think people would think about it like that. If it was a boy wearing a tie, a girl wearing a tie, or a girl wearing like a suit, I don't think people would be like, oh, this girl's wearing a suit, they're crossing the line, and they're like playing dress up in a suit. I don't think it would go that far, as in a, like for the adults to be like, take that off, like stop doing that. So that's something that I find very different as well. And also this article, it says disliking or refusing to pass urine as other members of their biological sex usually do. So that talks about like going to the bathroom, either sitting or standing and things like that. Insisting or hoping their genitals will change. So this is, again, still children. Feeling extreme distress at the physical changes of puberty. And so when their body is now changing to be more masculine or more feminine, they're kind of like, I don't really like the way this is going. And so it says children with gender dysphoria may display some or all of these behaviors. Behaviors such as these can be part of childhood and don't necessarily mean your child has gender dysphoria. Many girls behave in ways that can be described as tomboyish, which is often seen as part of normal female development. It's also not uncommon for boys to role play as girls and dress up in their mother's or sister's clothes. This is usually just a phase. And then it says most children who behave in these ways don't behave. I'm getting tired, so I'm gonna be messing up with my reading a lot. I do that a lot when I'm tired. I'm just like, I can't read properly. Most children who behave in these ways don't have gender dysphoria. Only in rare cases does the behavior continue in the teenage years and adulthood. So it says for teenagers, it says they're feeling, teenagers and adults, it lumps them into one. Feelings of gender dysphoria might still be there when your child is a teenager or adult. If so, it's likely that they're not just going through a phase. If you are a teenager or an adult whose feelings of gender dysphoria began in childhood, you may not have a much clearer sense of your own gender identity and how you want to deal with it. The way gender dysphoria affects teenagers and adults is different to the way it affects children. If you're a teenager or adult with gender dysphoria, you may feel the following things: without doubt that your gender identity is at odds with your biological sex, comfortable only when in your preferred gender identity, a strong desire to hide or be rid of the physical signs of your sex, a strong dislike for and a strong desire to change or be rid of the genitalia of your biological sex. And without help and support, some may try to suppress their feelings and try to live the life of their biological sex. But most people are unable to keep this up. Suppressing these feelings is often very difficult to deal with. As a result, some people with gender dysphoria experience depression, self-harm, or suicidal thoughts. It is important to access mental health care in these instances. And so definitely there can be, some co-occurring issues coming up. If someone has gender dysphoria, it can lead to some extreme other diagnoses and symptoms that can come up that can lead a person to even lose their lives, unfortunately. And I would say that a lot of this it seems very accurate the way they're describing. There's not really anything that shoots out as like a clear discrepancy. I do like the way they kind of break this down, like the difference between children and then like it might be like a phase, and then but I don't know how they determine if something's normal in a phase versus something that just people averagely do. It's kind of interesting to me that it I don't know if I'm even describing that correctly, but or wording that appropriately, but I just find it very interesting that it's like that people might not do exactly what's expected. But maybe they do. But yeah, I just find it interesting that they don't necessarily kind of like say that, during teenage and adult years that there's like a phase, which is interesting. It seems like if there's a phase, it's going to happen when you're a kid, and if you're an adult or a teen, then it's more likely, like that whole feeling or experience of somebody having their identity being at odds with biological sex. So being at odds with it. And so when they talk about interventions, I'm just scrolling through these. So it talks about psychotherapy or counseling. It says if you're experiencing anxiety due to reactions from family and friends, your GP might recommend psychotherapy or counseling. If you have a medical card, the GP may recommend the HSE, counseling and primary care. You can also request a referral to local HSE speech and language services. And this is not an American article, I don't think. But they do talk about different topics like transition support, interventions for adults, CAMS, interventions for pubertal children, so people with puberty, people who are in puberty, and then social transition. And then it talks about the aim of intervention. So basically interventions are designed to help people to cope with what they're experiencing so that they can live the way they want to live. however that may look. And that's individual. So I think with interventions, it's going to be usually a good idea for the person providing the treatment really to get a good background, the good understanding, but definitely hearing out the person that they're helping and try to find out and figure out together with them what it is they actually want as their goals. Because oftentimes, a lot of times people go in and they'll talk and talk and talk about things that aren't even on the topic of where they're trying to get. And that's okay too, because sometimes, it gives the other person helping them more and more information to work with, just, developing rapport and learning about a person's background just from like, it doesn't always have to be like, okay, we have to stick to the topic and here's a worksheet and we're going to only look at this. It can be more flexible too. And that can be helpful for a person to be able to kind of flexibly kind of just talk about things. But sometimes, they'll put so much energy into talking about things that have nothing to do with the actual goals they're trying to work on. And a lot of times when someone has anxiety and depression and different things like that, it can be hard to kind of work on the root of the problem. That's very, 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 very common, that people have a very hard time working on the root of the actual issue. And they feel like they're working on it. They want to seem like they're working on it because they're going into treatment, but they're not actually making those forward movements for their actual comfort to be, changing, and using coping skills and developing them and actually practicing them. People will learn and learn and learn and learn and learn often. That's a very common thing. People will learn a lot out of anxiety too. There is a certain point where you learn and then you start doing. A lot of times what's common is people will learn and then they never start doing. So that's something that's very super common to see and notice. But it's not always something that people do. But yeah, that's something that's very common. So people not really actually fully, like they'll learn, but they don't actually ever start to do. And then there's also, when people, so they'll learn and they don't do. And then another thing that comes up often is people talking about things, and keep on bringing up the same problem. But they're not doing anything towards working on it. And so that's usually what happens that makes it so that something can go on longer and longer. It's because just because someone has the information doesn't mean that they're ready to actually start working on what they need to do to be able to cope with things, because it's hard. I mean, but one thing to realize for people who are having these types of experiences is that it's going to be hard either way, right? Like, and it's kind of like a toss-up between, would you rather deal with the discomfort of how you're feeling already, or the discomfort of trying to work through things to potentially feel better? And for a lot of people, it can be a scary thing to try to implement new things because they're doing something new and different and they don't really know how to deal with it. They don't know how to deal with what comes up. Like, there's no protocol in place. They've never had these new different experiences, and it's a lot to try to unpack and try to kind of deal with. It's stressful. Sometimes people would almost rather stick with the stress that they already know, and notice that they have that and they don't want it, but they want like something easier to do. And sometimes with a lot of these sorts of social related kind of levels of distress, it's going to be hard to actually do these and cope and be able to feel more comfortable without doing social related things. Because, a person's gender identity is really going to be their own individual personal experience, but there is this aspect of expression of that kind of complicates things, because there can be an internal experience, but then if the internal isn't really matching the external experience, then it can be stressful to try to navigate that, because our society doesn't really have anything that a person can do where they can navigate that and like figure that out on their own. So they mentioned things like genital reconstructive surgery, and sorry, I'm like reading this. And it talks about the complications of that, and also it talks about interventions for pubertal children. So it gives mostly what the general doctor is going to do, the general practitioner is going to do. So that it's saying that, you know, in this case, they say that the person might be transferred to transparencl. That's spelled transparencl. And then there's also another referral that's TENI, TENI, the National Support Group for Transgender People. And then provide ongoing monitoring of the child's situation. So they'll refer the kid to these different sorts of support services. And then they're going to observe, you know, the kid's situation. And then when it talks about interventions for adults, it says definitely talk to the GP. That the GP is probably going to refer you to a mental health team for support and a diagnosis. This one talks about Ireland, people who can get treatment in Ireland. So I think this article's through either the UK or Ireland, somewhere in Ireland. But it's basically saying that that a person can get referrals from a doctor. And one thing that I've noticed with different types of interventions, especially when people are going these professional routes through doctors, is that if you don't have an accurate diagnosis that qualifies you, you are likely not going to be able to qualify for certain types of services. And so sometimes it takes some learning on a person's end to, I'm not saying you're gonna like go into a doctor's office and like fake symptoms and things, but it's like, if you don't have words to describe what you're experiencing, or if you can't explain it in a way that a doctor is gonna mark off certain symptoms and experiences that would give you a certain diagnosis, or put you in a certain criteria, or put you in a certain category of people who are going to be recommended and be eligible to access certain types of treatment, you might not even be able to get the treatment that you're looking for, or the interventions that you're looking for. I know when people are looking for different types of gender reassignment, like surgeries and things like that, it's not like someone can just go into a doctor and say, I have gender dysphoria, and they're like, okay, let me like send you this referral to like gender reassignment surgery, and then they get you in like a week, and then you just go do it. Like, it's not like that. Or if you go to the ER, you know, because of, you know, like suicidal thoughts or something along those lines, or like you had a gesture or an attempt or something, and you're trying to get, you know, some kind of support for an emergency crisis situation, and that comes from the dysphoria, you know, they're not just going to be like, oh, you know, transfer from the hospital to gender reassignment surgery. Like, these are longer processes that somebody else decided that you have to go through these long, lengthy processes to get that reassignment treatment. Somebody else is the one making those decisions for you. Somebody else is writing off on it for you. You can't just go get it, you know. You can't just go get hormones, you know. You can't just, you know, go to like a dispensary for like hormone, you know, injections, you know, like things like that. You know, it's such a lengthy process that if your insurance doesn't even cover it, if you don't have the access to it where you live, I mean, it's really troubling to kind of just even notice that, like, when people have those experiences and they want the help, even if they could afford it, it's not even always there. Or even if they have a way and do qualify for it, just getting the support isn't fast. Even though a person might really actually know, this is really what I actually do want. I've wanted this for years and decades, and somebody else is kind of the one that's going to make a decision as to when you can start, how long, you know, the experiences are that you're going to have. There's a YouTuber I follow that I mention often, Ash Hardell, and Ash Hardell is a very brave person, putting a lot of content information online about their experience with transitioning and their surgery. And I think that was very brave that they put that online, because a lot of times, you know, people who might want to have those surgeries or those experiences, or you know where to start. I mean, they don't even know where to start because there's no representation, really, not a whole lot. There is some, but not a whole lot of representation, because not a lot of people are able to even get it. And when they do, it's like there's still follow-ups, and I'm not trying to like discourage people from doing it, but there can be complications, and then there can be long-term follow-up treatment that a person needs to be able to, you know, still be appropriately like maintaining their body and different things like that. And like I was saying in the other clip, you know, during COVID, all of these things aren't necessarily all available anymore to everybody. The follow-up treatments, especially, and things like that, and different specialists that people would get referred to because of COVID, and because a lot of doctors are now online only and can't, you know, because of social distancing, you can't really meet the patient. A lot of times, you know, someone needs a certain type of intervention, they can't really even get it, even though it's already been super limited and hard to get. And so a lot of people right now are definitely suffering, like completely suffering, and they're not able to really get what they need. And when it comes to, you know, this topic, on top of all the suffering that's already going on, people can't even like, it seems like for a lot of, I'm not saying that there is no hope, but it seems for some people that, you know, it's a more hopeless environment, and it doesn't have to feel that way. I mean, it on the surface, that's really going to be how it looks, but it's going to be times like these where, you know, people are really going to be kind of forced to only do the internal work that has to be done to be able to cope, because there's a lot of stuff that people can't really have access to, professional access to, because it's just not available because of COVID. And so unfortunately, a lot of things are delayed or canceled, or I mean, I've even seen services and clinics where in my environment, in my location, shutting down, being absorbed by these other bigger you know, health companies that are like now so overly crowded and impacted that even though people could get help faster through the smaller clinic, and maybe the doctors were, you know, there's certain popular doctors that I refer a lot of people to, that before, you know, even when I first started the job I'm at now, when I transferred over to this job late May, I was able to just call these offices. I would just call them, and the doctors and, you know, the representatives would pick up right away. I could, you know, get people referred. I could check in on their paperwork, and it was simple. It was easy. You know, someone in an office would answer. I wouldn't be on hold for like an hour and a half just for the phone call to drop, and then it gets transferred to another line that person drops the call, then I have to call back and then wait on hold for another hour and a half, you know, or just leave my callback number and nobody ever calls me back and things like that. And I'm the one that's coordinating care. I'm not even the patient in these cases, and I'm struggling to even coordinate care, and I know the system. And so it's definitely becoming a problem that, you know, referring is getting harder, follow-ups with referrals is getting harder. You know, people are being more and more overworked. People are fearful of like the job market right now too. Even if you are an essential worker, I mean, that's just, for now, that's kind of just what that means. It doesn't mean that all of our jobs are guaranteed forever. and somebody else is deciding who's essential. And like I mentioned in the other clip, when they were talking about essential workers, there are people out there whose specialists are no longer considered essential. So the treatment they're supposed to be getting is on hold. They're not able to get certain meds refilled or available to them legally. They're not able to get certain treatments, if it's like a physical therapy treatment and things for pain, if they've even undergone like gender reassignment and different type of surgeries, the follow-up treatment isn't even available. And so there are a lot of people out there that are suffering through all these things, and they're not really able to have access to things, different types of plant medicine, types of resources and things like that. I mean, it varies state to state and place to place. And so there are certain things that people might use that in some places is legal and you can get it and it might help. And then other places it's not even legal, so you can't even get it. And medications, if it's not covered by insurance, it's not cheap. I'm lucky because where I live, we're close to Mexico. And Mexico is like a huge resource for people who can't afford things. To just, to go across the border and get what you need to get. You can get dental work done down there. If you have a little bit of money on this U.S. side of the border, you can get a lot more dental care across on the Mexican side of the border for fractions of what it costs on the U.S. side. And the follow-up treatment and everything, it can be very beneficial, helpful, and the doctors are good. I'd say people have to research it for sure, but I do know people who get different benzos, different types of meds across the border that their doctors won't prescribe here, or different treatments across the border that their doctors can't do here, but they do them in Mexico. But then in Mexico, things might be shut down too, which is something I don't really know. But I mean, it's a great resource where I live, but not everybody lives right next to Mexico or another completely different country. So when people start talking about, how to cope with a different form of like emotional distress that's going on, one of my absolute favorite types of treatment that people can use is called ISTDP. So let me see. So John Fredrickson, he's the main founder or so, or the main name you'll see with ISTDP is John Fredrickson. And ISTDP stands for Intensive Short-Term Dynamic Psychotherapy. And so I like that it's straight to the point. I like that ISTDP is very, very, it's confrontational, and you can do almost like a self-help method of ISTDP that I want to talk more about. So people can do like a more self-help version of ISTDP. And what it is mainly is focusing on an issue, focusing on a problem, identifying what that main issue is, and then actually doing the work without acknowledging or allowing, not acknowledging, but without allowing defense mechanisms to come up and interfere with somebody actually getting the work done. So one example that's a super common example that you see in therapy all the time, and I'm not making fun of people. I mean, everybody does this. I do the same thing. But sometimes there's something that's maybe hard to process or hard to talk about or hard to just naturally, right? It's just difficult, right? So say if somebody was having like gender dysphoria, and the therapist recognizes this person keeps bringing up this issue with like maybe their clothing or their gender or different things on the gender related topic, and maybe the therapist or counselor or provider working with this patient asks them, do you feel like you have gender dysphoria? And a common response from a lot of patients would be, I don't know. Expecting that when a person says, I don't know, that means end of conversation. That means I need you to ask the next question and we're moving on. And that's a defense mechanism. It's a defense because I don't know could literally mean the person doesn't know what gender dysphoria means. They don't know what the term means. They don't know the definition. So they're saying, I don't know. I don't know what that means. I don't know if I have that. But I don't know can also mean I'm not going to get into it. I'm not going to think about it. I'm not going to unpack this. I don't want to process it. Or I do know, and maybe it's like an embarrassing topic or somebody doesn't really want to talk about it and they do know and they just say that they don't know. Because usually when somebody says, I don't know, what happens? Usually the other person will stop, trying to unpack that and they'll be like, oh, you don't know? And so they'll just be like, all right, they just don't know. But in a different setting, it's kind of like if somebody asked you directly if you have gender dysphoria and, you've been going in maybe to, this therapy treatment for like 3 months or something. And every single session, if you're seen once a week, that's like 15 sessions already. I can't count. That's like 12 sessions already. 12 sessions already that you've gone in and you said things that lead the therapist to think that you might have gender dysphoria because you keep mentioning different categories related to gender and different categories related to dysphoria and those stressors that keep coming up related to gender. And they see that you keep mentioning it, but then you say you don't know, right? So it's kind of like, that's just an example of how someone can use ISTDP to try to, first identifying that defense that comes up of like, you're saying you don't know. And then, not to like attack, there's no like attacking in this and being like, you said you don't know. And like, like you should know because you're being defensive. And like, it's not like that. It's a much more, compassionate. It should be way more a compassionate type of treatment and help. So if you do have someone using ISTDP and they're being a jerk, they're not doing it right. I'd say ISTDP can be complex for someone who's maybe a really sensitive person. And if you have a provider who's not very sensitive and is kind of more confrontational and not really aware or caring of how you actually feel, it's not going to work very well because, people can't be open about their situations if they're feeling kind of like threatened. And so ISTDP shouldn't be used for someone to kind of like pump themselves up and take this like ego place in the treatment. But I do want to talk more about this in more detail. But one way that a person can address that certain level when they talk about when there's ISTDP and somebody talks about what was I saying? Like when someone's using ISTDP and working with someone on a defense, that would be like a simple thing like saying I don't know when they're bringing up a lot of gender related distressing topics. It's like they might not know, but trying to figure out what the I don't know means, that would be a good step to kind of unpack the I don't know. It's kind of like, well, the reason why I'm asking you is because, today you mentioned that, you don't like the shoes you're wearing because they're too pink and they're too, your socks have little, lace on them, and your mom made you wear this hat that has lace on it and you don't want to wear that. And then the last week when you came in, you mentioned, that, your friend made a comment about, like you act like a boy, and that kind of got to you and you were upset and got in an argument with them about that. And then the week before that, it's kind of like not pointing it out like to, no one would point it out in that way. But I'm just saying, they shouldn't point it out in that way. You'd sound like a complete, total jerk. But I'm just saying, like, in general, that's how these topics would work, is when the defense comes up, the therapist is to help the patient unpack it and develop comfort or a method of at least addressing it, instead of just glazing over and saying, like, I'm mentioning these things, I'm talking these things about you, but I'm doing nothing else with it other than having distress and having discomfort and having to sit in that and not know what to do. The reason behind why it's important to unpack defenses is if a person can develop a level of comfort with the situation that's causing the defense to automatically come up, if they can find a way to cope with the discomfort that leads to the defense, or find a way to unpack the defense, then they're actually working on it. But if a person, isn't willing to actually do that, even if they don't want to tell the therapist what they actually feel or what they actually think, they can be given an assignment to go home and unpack it for themselves and say, hey, you don't have to talk to me about this, but talk to yourself about it then, like do some work on your own, some self-reflection work on your own, do some audio journaling, some drawing, some diary writing, some artistic expression, see kind of what comes out, and talk about that experience next time you come in, things like that. But I do want to talk more about ISTDP because I think it's really cool. It's probably one of my favorite types of interventions. With long-term, I feel like it's helpful for longer-term patients, even though it is supposed to be like shorter-term for psychotherapy. I like it with people who I've worked with for a lengthy amount of time, to start using it later on, because you've already developed the rapport, you already know a lot of their patterns, you already know a lot of the issues that come up for them, but then you're helping them work on something that's kind of a way deeper level of processing. And it's really hard to do that level of processing with somebody that maybe doesn't trust you yet, or you don't really know. And it's like, people can't really read you easily sometimes when you're like, oh yeah, like I'm doing therapy, and like, it's like, if you're working on someone's defenses, it's very likely that they're going to become defensive. And so if they don't know you very well and you don't know them very well, it's kind of harder. In my opinion, in my own experience, it's been harder to work with people using ISCDP if I don't really know them as well as I could. But yeah, that's just some food for thought. And I'm going to talk more about, like, more directly how people could use maybe examples of this. And ISTDP isn't the only thing that exists. There's DBT, there's CBT, there's motivational interviewing, there's all sorts of different interventions that are classic interventions that work, that people can even get self-help books to try to go through things by themselves and figure out those things. So hopefully this is helpful. I know I'm talking often about just like a whole lot of background stuff about gender dysphoria, but I hope this is helpful. I'm gonna go eat lunch because it's gonna be 1:30 in like 1 minute, so I'm gonna go eat lunch and then get back on my recordings because today's Sunday. Trying to make it podcast Sunday. Today's the day when I have the most time and energy to be working on this stuff, so I really want to put out as much as I can so that I can work on it and get it out there, in case somebody's looking for more support, because right now there isn't that much support out there. There are definitely like content creators that are out there doing like some amazing, wonderful stuff. And especially because a lot of us are home more often than we ever were. I'm not out partying much anymore. I'm not out doing much of anything anymore. I'm just at home all the time. So I have plenty of time and energy to do all this. Maybe I'm not focused, sometimes, but, I definitely can do it more than before because I'm not spending all my time, like, running around with my friends and, like, going out and dating and all kinds of other stuff. I'm not doing anything. I'm just chilling. So hopefully this is helpful. I know I didn't get too much into interventions, but I do want to start breaking it down more and more and more into something that's more useful, more of something that people can actually use. And if I can create like worksheets and things, I'll, for some PDFs, I'll post those up too. I don't want to do anything that's going to get in the way of the process of actually getting this done. So I might just do like a step by step. And again, this one's over an hour. It's going to be like 70 minutes. So if you listen this far, I really do appreciate it. But I'm getting tired and I need to take a break. I'm almost doing like an 8-hour shift with this. All right, bye.